The dust settled around Samuel Mitchell's boots as he dismounted his horse outside the weathered cabin that sat like a forgotten prayer in the shadow of the Colorado Rockies. The year was 1873, and the territory was still wild enough to swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful. Samuel had been careful for 42 years, building his ranch from nothing but determination and calloused hands, but today something felt different. Today, he was stepping into territory that had nothing to do with cattle or land rights. He'd been searching for Rosa Delgado for 3 weeks now, ever since she'd stopped coming to clean his ranch house. Rosa had been working for him for 2 years, arriving every Monday and Thursday like clockwork, her small hands making quick work of the dust and disorder that seemed to accumulate in the corners of his life. She never said much, just nodded politely when he offered her coffee and accepted her wages with a quiet dignity that made him feel both grateful and somehow ashamed of his own loneliness. The cabin before him looked abandoned, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Samuel had followed rumors and whispered directions from the Mexican workers in town, piecing together fragments of information like a tracker following a cold trail. Rosa lived somewhere up in the hills, they said, somewhere past the old mining camp where the creek bent toward the hidden valley. But when he'd asked direct questions, faces had closed like shutters, and conversations had turned to safer topics. Samuel knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping against wood that had seen too many harsh winters. The sound echoed hollowly, and for a moment he wondered if he'd come to the wrong place. Then he heard it, a child's laughter, quickly hushed, followed by the soft scrape of footsteps on wooden floors. The door opened just a crack, revealing a single dark eye that widened with recognition and fear. Fcour Mitchell. Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. "You should not be here." "Rosa, I've been worried sick about you," Samuel said, removing his hat. "You stopped coming to work, and nobody would tell me why. I needed to know you were all right." The eye disappeared, and Samuel heard urgent whispers in Spanish. When the door opened again, Rosa stood there fully, her small frame blocking the entrance. She was thinner than he remembered, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her chin was set with the same quiet determination he'd come to recognize. "I am fine, Fcour Mitchell. Please, you must go now." But Samuel had caught a glimpse of movement behind her, small shadows that ducked away from the doorway. His heart clenched as understanding began to dawn. "Rosa, are there children here?" Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment the careful mask she wore slipped. "Please," she whispered, "just leave us be." Samuel looked past her into the dim interior of the cabin. It was smaller than his barn, with a dirt floor and walls that looked like they'd been patched with whatever materials could be found. But it was clean, meticulously so, and he could see attempts at making it homelike, a wildflower in a chipped cup, a quilt folded neatly on a rough wooden chair. "How many children, Rosa?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. "4," she said simply. The word hit Samuel like a physical blow. 4 children, hidden away in this forgotten corner of the world, with Rosa struggling to care for them alone. He thought of his own empty house, of the silence that followed him from room to room, of the way he'd begun to look forward to Rosa's visits not just for the cleaning, but for the brief presence of another human being. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Rosa hesitated, then stepped aside. Samuel entered the cabin, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. 4 pairs of eyes stared back at him from various corners of the room. A boy of perhaps 12, 2 girls who looked to be 8 and 6, and a tiny boy who couldn't have been more than 4. They were all thin, but clean and well cared for, their clothes patched but neat. "These are my children," Rosa said, her voice carrying a fierce protectiveness. "Miguel, Elena, Sofia, and little Carlos." Samuel crouched down to the level of the youngest boy, who was hiding behind his mother's skirts. "Hello, Carlos," he said softly. The boy peeked out, then quickly hid again, but Samuel caught the ghost of a smile. "Where is their father?" Samuel asked, standing. Rosa's face hardened. "Gone. 2 years now. He went to find work in the silver mines up north. We heard he was killed in a cave-in, but there was no body, no proof, nothing for the widow of a Mexican worker." Samuel felt anger rising in his chest, not at Rosa but at the cruel indifference of a world that could abandon a woman and 4 children to fend for themselves. "How have you been managing?" "I work when I can find it. I clean houses, take in washing, sometimes help with harvest. The children, they help too. Miguel can already handle a horse better than most men." Samuel looked around the cabin again, seeing it now with different eyes. The careful cleanliness, the attempts at comfort, the way the children stayed close to their mother. This was a family held together by will and love and precious little else. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Rosa's eyes flashed. "Ask for what? Charity? Pity, we are not beggars, C. or Mitchell. We work for what we need. But you stopped coming to work." Rosa looked at her feet. "Sophia, she got sick. Very sick. The doctor in town. He wanted $20 just to look at her. I had to choose between working and staying here to care for her." Samuel felt something break open in his chest. $20, less than what he'd spend on a new saddle, but it might as well have been a fortune to Rosa. Is she better now? The fever broke 3 days ago, but she is still weak. Samuel walked to the window and looked out at the valley beyond. It was beautiful country, wild and untamed, but it was also unforgiving. Winter was coming, and this cabin would be no shelter against the bitter cold that would descend from the mountains. These children would not survive another winter here. "I have a proposition for you," he said, turning back to Rosa. Her face became guarded. "What kind of proposition? Come work for me, all of you. I need help with the ranch, and you need a place to live. There's a bunkhouse that's been empty for years. It's got a good roof, a stone fireplace, and enough room for a family." Rosa shook her head immediately. "I cannot accept charity. It's not charity, it's work. Miguel looks old enough to help with the horses. Elena and Sofia could help with the house and the garden. Even Carlos could feed the chickens. And what would you pay for this work?" Samuel thought quickly. $20 a month, plus room and board for all of you. Rosa's eyes widened. It was more than she'd made in her best months, and they both knew it, but suspicion remained in her expression. "Why would you do this for us?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. How could he explain the loneliness that had been eating away at him for years? How could he describe the way his house felt like a tomb? How the silence at his dinner table had become unbearable? How could he tell her that her children's laughter might be the thing that saved him from the slow death of solitude? "Because," he said finally, "I think we could help each other." Rosa studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. Samuel met her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. "The children," she said slowly, "they would be safer than they are here, and you would not expect other things." Samuel felt his face flush. "Rosa, I'm offering you honest work, nothing more. You'd have your own quarters, your own space. I'm not looking for a wife or a mistress. I'm looking for help, and it seems like you need work." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. Finally, Rosa nodded slowly. "We will try it. But if it does not work, if the children are not happy, we will leave." "Fair enough." That evening, Samuel helped Rosa and the children pack their few possessions into his wagon. It didn't take long. They owned almost nothing of value, just clothes and a few precious items that had belonged to Rosa's husband. As they prepared to leave, Samuel noticed Miguel hanging back, staring at the cabin with something like grief in his young eyes. "It's the only home you remember, isn't it?" Samuel asked quietly. Miguel nodded, not trusting his voice. "Sometimes leaving the only place you've known is the hardest thing in the world," Samuel said. "But sometimes it's the only way to find something better." The boy looked at him with eyes that were too old for his 12 years. "What if there is nothing better?" Samuel put a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "Then we'll make something better." The journey to Samuel's ranch took 2 hours, the wagon bouncing along rutted trails as the sun set behind the mountains. The children huddled together in the back, whispering among themselves in Spanish, while Rosa sat stiffly beside Samuel on the driver's bench. "Are you having second thoughts?" Samuel asked as they crested a hill that offered a view of his spread below. Rosa looked at the ranch house, the barn, the corrals full of horses, the vast expanse of grassland that stretched to the horizon. "It is bigger than I expected," she said quietly. "It's taken me 20 years to build," Samuel said. "Started with nothing but a piece of paper that said I owned this land and a determination to make something of it." "Were you ever married?" The question caught him off guard. "Once," he said after a moment. "Her name was Catherine. She died in childbirth our first year here. The baby died too." Rosa was quiet for a long time. "I am sorry," she said finally. "It was a long time ago, but you still mourn." Samuel didn't answer, but Rosa seemed to understand his silence. They reached the ranch as the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Samuel helped Rosa and the children down from the wagon, then led them to the bunkhouse. It was a solid structure built of local stone and timber, with 2 rooms and a sleeping loft. It hadn't been used in years, but Samuel had spent the last 3 weeks cleaning it and making repairs. "This is where you'll live," he said, opening the door. Rosa stepped inside, the children crowding behind her. Samuel had stocked the pantry with basic supplies, put fresh linens on the beds, and even bought a few toys for the younger children. Rosa moved through the space slowly, touching the clean surfaces, the sturdy furniture, the stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the winter. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's what you've earned," Samuel said. "And what you'll continue to earn over the next weeks." Samuel watched his ranch come alive in ways he'd never imagined. Miguel proved to be a natural with horses, gentle but confident, with an instinctive understanding of the animals that impressed even Samuel's experienced hands. Elena and Sofia threw themselves into helping with the house and garden, their childish chatter filling spaces that had been silent for too long. Even little Carlos found his place, proudly carrying small buckets of feed to the chickens and collecting eggs with the serious concentration of someone performing an important task. Rosa worked with the same quiet efficiency she'd always shown, but now there was something different about her. The constant worry lines around her eyes began to fade, and Samuel occasionally caught her singing softly as she worked. The children bloomed under the security of regular meals and a warm place to sleep, their laughter echoing across the ranch yard. But it was the evenings that Samuel treasured most. After the work was done and the children had been fed and bathed, Rosa would sometimes sit on the porch of the bunkhouse, mending clothes or just watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Samuel would find excuses to join her, bringing coffee or discussing the next day's work, but really just savoring the companionship. "Tell me about your husband," he said one evening as they watched Miguel teaching Carlos to rope a fence post. Rosa's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. "He was a good man," she said simply. "Not educated, but smart. He could fix anything, build anything. He loved the children very much. Do you miss him?" "Every day. But the sharp pain, it has become something softer. More like a sweet sadness, if that makes sense." Samuel nodded. He understood about that kind of grief, the way it could change shape over time without ever really leaving. "What about your wife?" Rosa asked. "What was she like?" Samuel was quiet for a long time. She was city-born, from back east. Her father was a banker, and she was used to fine things. I think she regretted coming here almost immediately, but she was too proud to admit it. She tried to make the best of it, but this life was harder than she'd expected. "Did she love you?" "I think so. But I think she loved the idea of me more than the reality. She thought I was romantic, a cowboy hero from one of those dime novels. She didn't bargain for the loneliness, the hard work, the way this country can break your spirit if you're not careful." Rosa looked at him with something like understanding. "And you blame yourself for her death." It wasn't a question, and Samuel felt no need to deny it. If I'd taken her back east when she asked, if I'd given up the ranch, maybe she would have lived. Or maybe she would have died in a comfortable bed in a fine house, and you would have spent your life wondering what might have been. Samuel looked at her in surprise. "You don't think I should have given up the ranch?" "I think a man cannot live someone else's life, no matter how much he loves them. And I think your wife knew this, or she would not have stayed." As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch settled into comfortable rhythms. Samuel found himself looking forward to each day in ways he hadn't for years. The children brought energy and purpose to work that had become routine, and Rosa's presence made the big house feel less empty. But it was more than that. They were becoming something like a family, bound not by blood but by choice and mutual need. The first real test came in November, when an early blizzard trapped them all inside for 3 days. Samuel had been worried about how they'd manage, cooped up together with nowhere to go. But instead of tension, the storm brought unexpected warmth. The children played games and told stories in Spanish and English, teaching Samuel words in their language while he taught them card games and riddles. Rosa cooked wonderful meals with whatever they had on hand, and in the evenings they all gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and songs. It was during one of these evenings that little Carlos climbed onto Samuel's lap, his small body warm and trusting. "Say, Sam," he said in his careful English, "are you our papa now?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Samuel looked over Carlos's head at Rosa, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. The other children had gone quiet, waiting for his answer. "I'm your friend," Samuel said carefully, A friend who cares about you very much. Carlos seemed satisfied with this answer, but Samuel caught the flicker of something, disappointment, relief, in Rosa's eyes before she looked away. That night, after the children were asleep, Samuel walked Rosa back to the bunkhouse. The snow had stopped, and the moon was so bright it cast sharp shadows across the yard. "I didn't know how to answer him," Samuel said as they reached her door. "You answered honestly. That is always best with children. But it made me think about what we're doing here, what this is becoming." Rosa turned to face him. "What do you think it is becoming?" Samuel struggled for words. "I don't know. Something I never expected, something I'm not sure I know how to handle. Are you unhappy with the arrangement?"
No, God, no. It's just,
"I care about you, Rosa. More than I probably should. And that frightens you." "Yes, it frightens me too," she admitted. "I loved my husband very much. I never thought I could feel anything like that again.
and now?
Now I do not know what I feel. Grateful, yes, safe, yes, but also confused." Samuel stepped closer, and Rosa didn't back away. "I don't want to take advantage of your situation. I don't want you to feel obligated to me. And I do not want to be your replacement for the wife you lost." They stood looking at each other in the moonlight, two people who had both known loss and were now faced with the possibility of something new and uncertain. "So what do we do?" Samuel asked. "We continue as we are," Rosa said. "We take care of each other, we raise the children, we build something good here, and we let time tell us what it wants to become." Samuel nodded, understanding that this was not a rejection but a recognition that some things couldn't be rushed or forced. "Time," he agreed. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. Samuel decided to expand the ranch, adding cattle to his horse operation. It meant more work, but also more income, and he found himself planning for the future in ways he hadn't in years. The children continued to grow and thrive. Miguel had become Samuel's right hand, able to handle responsibility that would have overwhelmed boys his age. Elena and Sofia had transformed the ranch house into a real home, their touches evident in every room. Carlos had attached himself to Samuel with the fierce loyalty of a 4-year-old, following him around the ranch like a devoted shadow. And Rosa had become something Samuel couldn't quite define. She was more than an employee, more than a friend, but not quite what. The question haunted him as he watched her hanging laundry in the spring sunshine, her dark hair catching the light, her movements graceful and sure. The answer came in May, when trouble arrived in the form of Frank Morrison, a local rancher who had always resented Samuel's success. Morrison had been drinking when he rode onto the ranch, and his words were slurred with whiskey and malice. "Heard you got yourself a Mexican whore and her bastard kids," Morrison said, swaying in his saddle. "Always knew you were soft, Mitchell, but I didn't think you'd sink this low." Samuel felt rage surge through him, but before he could respond, Miguel stepped out of the barn. The boy's young face was hard with fury, his hands clenched into fists. "You take that back," Miguel said, his voice shaking with anger. "You take that back about my mother." Morrison laughed, an ugly sound. "Look at that, the little spick thinks he's tough. Maybe I should teach him some manners." Samuel stepped between Morrison and the boy, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "You need to leave, Frank. Now, or what? You'll shoot me over some Mexican trash." The words had barely left Morrison's mouth when Samuel's fist connected with his jaw. The drunk man tumbled from his horse, landing hard in the dirt. Samuel was on him in an instant, hauling him to his feet. "You don't talk about my family that way," Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. "You don't ever talk about them that way." Morrison spat blood. "Your family? Christ, Mitchell, you really have lost your mind." "Maybe I have. But if you ever set foot on my land again, if you ever say one word against Rosa or her children, I'll put a bullet in you without a second thought." Morrison mounted his horse with some difficulty, his face already swelling where Samuel had hit him. "This ain't over, Mitchell. The whole county's going to know what kind of man you really are." After Morrison rode away, Samuel stood in the yard, his hands shaking with leftover adrenaline. He became aware of Rosa standing in the doorway of the house, her face pale but proud. The children were clustered around her, their eyes wide with fear and admiration. "You called us your family," Miguel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel looked at the boy, then at Rosa, then at the other children. "I guess I did. Did you mean it?" Elena asked. Samuel walked over to them, his steps heavy with the weight of decision. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I meant it." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. even if it makes things difficult for you. Especially then, that evening after the children were in bed. Samuel and Rosa sat on the porch of the main house. The crisis had shifted something between them, bringing into the open feelings that had been growing for months. Morrison will make trouble, Rosa said. He will tell people things, spread lies. Let him. I don't care what people think. But I do. I care that people will think poorly of you because of us. Samuel turned to face her. Rosa, I've been alone for almost 20 years. I've been so lonely that sometimes I thought it would kill me. And then you came into my life, you and the children, and suddenly I remember what it feels like to have something worth fighting for. Samuel, I love you, he said simply. I love you, and I love those children like they were my own. I don't know when it happened or how, but it's true. Rosa was quiet for a long time. I love you too, she said finally. But love is not always enough. There are practical things to consider, difficult things. Like what? Like the fact that I am Mexican and you are Anglo. Like the fact that we are not married, and people will talk. Like the fact that my children need a father, but have never had one who was not their own blood. Samuel stood up and walked to the porch railing. Then marry me, he said. Rosa's sharp intake of breath was audible. What? Marry me. Make this official, make this real. Be my wife, let me be their father. Samuel, you cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Rosa joined him at the railing, her hand finding his. It would not be easy. People like Morrison, they will make our lives difficult. I don't care. The children, they would have to take your name, live as your children. Are you ready for that responsibility? Samuel thought of Miguel's fierce loyalty, of Alina and Sophia's laughter, of Carlos's tiny hand in his. I'm ready. And me. Are you ready for a wife who is not the woman you married before, who comes with a past and children and complications? Samuel turned to face her, taking her hands in his. Rosa, you are nothing like Catherine, and I'm grateful for that. Catherine was a good woman, but she was never really mine. She was always trying to be someone else, somewhere else. You belong here with me with this life. You make it better just by being in it. Rosa searched his face in the moonlight. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? I'm sure. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding took place a month later, in the small church in town. It was not a large affair. Samuel's few friends, some of the Mexican families Rosa had worked for, and the children, who served as both witnesses and participants. Miguel walked Rosa down the aisle, his young face serious with the weight of his responsibility. Elena and Sofia scattered wildflowers, while Carlos held the rings with the intense concentration of someone entrusted with treasure. There were whispers, of course, disapproving looks from some of the Anglo families, curious stares from others. But there were also smiles from people who had seen Samuel's loneliness and were glad to see it ended, from families who had watched Rosa struggle and were happy to see her find security. After the ceremony, they held a small reception at the ranch. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Samuel found himself standing with Rosa in the doorway of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Are you happy? He asked. Rosa leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I did not think I could be this happy again. Even with all the complications. Especially with all the complications. Samuel wrapped his arms around his wife, marveling at how right the word felt. I love you, Mrs. Mitchell. And I love you, my husband. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were hard winters when the cattle died and money was scarce. There were summers when the rains didn't come and the grass turned brown and brittle. There were people like Morrison who made their disapproval known. Though most of them learned to keep their opinions to themselves after Samuel made it clear he would not tolerate disrespect toward his family. But there were also moments of pure joy. The morning Rosa told him she was carrying his child, her eyes bright with happiness and fear. The day Miguel turned 16 and Samuel officially made him foreman of the ranch, trusting him with responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most grown men. The evenings when Elena played the piano Samuel had bought for her, filling the house with music that seemed to wash away the day's troubles. Sophia grew into a young woman of remarkable intelligence, eventually becoming a teacher in the local school. She would later say that her stepfather taught her that education was the one thing no one could take away from you, and she made it her mission to ensure that other children, regardless of their background, had access to learning. Carlos, the little boy who had once hidden behind his mother's skirts, grew tall and strong, with his father's steady hands and his mother's gentle heart. He would take over the ranch when Samuel grew too old to manage it, expanding it into one of the largest operations in the territory, while never forgetting the lessons about dignity and compassion that had been taught to him in that small bunkhouse. But it was the quiet moments that Samuel treasured most. The mornings when he would wake to find Rosa already up, making coffee and humming softly to herself. The evenings when they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, their hands intertwined, their children's voices echoing across the yard. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come looking for me that day?" Rosa asked one evening, 20 years after their wedding. Samuel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he said. "But then I remember that some things are meant to be. We found each other when we both needed finding. You saved us," Rosa said softly. "No," Samuel replied, squeezing her hand. "We saved each other." As the years passed, Samuel and Rosa grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They faced trials and tribulations, joys and sorrows, but they faced them together, drawing strength from each other and from the family they had built. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. But more than that, it became a symbol of what was possible when people chose to see past their differences and build something beautiful together. The Mitchell family was known throughout the region for their kindness, their integrity, and their willingness to help others in need. On his 70th birthday, Samuel stood on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands, watching his grandchildren play in the yard where his own children had played decades before. Rosa sat beside him, her hair now silver but her eyes still bright with the fire that had first drawn him to her. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, taking his hand. "The choice you made that day when you came looking for me?" Samuel thought about the question seriously, as he always did when Rosa asked him something important. He thought about the lonely years before she came into his life, the empty house and silent meals. He thought about the risks they had taken, the challenges they had faced, the love they had found in the most unlikely circumstances. "Never," he said finally. "Not for a single moment, even when people said we were wrong, when they made things difficult. Especially then. The best things in life are worth fighting for." Rosa squeezed his hand. "I used to think that love was about finding someone who could give you everything you needed. Now I know it's about finding someone who makes you want to give everything you have." Samuel looked at his wife, at the woman who had transformed his life and filled his empty spaces with laughter and purpose. "You gave me everything," he said. "You gave me a family, a reason to get up in the morning, a future worth living for. And you gave me safety, security, a place to belong. You gave my children a father and a home. We gave each other a chance," Samuel said. "That's all anyone can really do." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold, Samuel Mitchell sat with his wife on the porch of their home, surrounded by the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination and love. It had not been an easy road, but it had been theirs, and that had made all the difference. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who had learned that family was not just about blood but about choice, about the decision to love and protect and nurture each other through all the seasons of life. And somewhere in the hidden valley where it all began, the wind would continue to blow through the abandoned cabin, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and love and the promise that sometimes, if you are brave enough to knock on the right door, you might find exactly what you never knew you were looking for. Years later, when Samuel was asked by a traveling journalist about the secret to his success, he would pause and look out over the land that had given him everything. The reporter expected him to talk about cattle prices or weather patterns, about the business of ranching in a hard country. Instead, Samuel would speak about a woman with 4 children who had nothing but dignity and determination, about the courage it takes to open your heart when you've been hurt before, about the way love can transform not just 2 people, but an entire family, an entire legacy. The journalist would write about the Mitchell Ranch and its prosperity, but he would miss the real story, the story of how a lonely man's search for his housekeeper led him to discover that the greatest wealth isn't measured in acres or cattle, but in the laughter of children around your dinner table, the warmth of a wife's hand in yours, and the knowledge that when you're gone, you'll leave behind something more valuable than gold or silver. you'll leave behind love multiplied across generations, a testament to the truth that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple knock on a door, and sometimes the greatest courage is found not in facing down outlaws or taming wild horses, but in choosing to build a life with someone who sees the world differently than you do. Samuel Mitchell had knocked on Rosa Delgado's door looking for an employee. He had found instead a partner, a family, and a reason to believe that even in the hardest country, even in the loneliest circumstances, hope could take root and grow into something beautiful. The dust that had swirled around his boots that first day had long since settled. But the love that grew from that moment would endure as long as the mountains themselves, a reminder that the best things in life often come disguised as the most unlikely possibilities, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in what we seek, but in what we discover when we have the courage to truly see what's right in front of us.